Well, here we are. And once again, I'm delighted to make an introduction, but I do want to preface my introduction of Marji Beach of Animal Place with a very important exhortation. We have tables out here. United Poultry Concerns has a table, Eric has a table, Animal Place has a table. We brought this literature for you. We brought this literature for you to take with you, read it, educate yourself, and distribute it. That's why we bring it. Don't say, oh, well, I don't want to waste paper. This is not a waste of paper. This is an educational opportunity for people to take informative literature with them to educate themselves, because you want to be an educated activist. You want to know the subject. You want to know the topic. You want to be as effective in talking to other people about animals and about conscious eating and about animal-free meals and all of these things as you can possibly be. So to do that, you have to read. And so to do that too, you want to be able to read, and then you want to be able to put this information in other people's hands, because that's how we help these animals, and that's how we help to change the world. So don't walk out of here without our literature. We want to leave tonight with empty tables, because you took the literature with you to read and to share. So please don't be shy, go by our tables and take that literature with you, read it, distribute it, talk it up. Please do that. That's why we brought it for you. Thank you. Now, Marji Beach, I've had the pleasure of meeting at Animal Place, where 2 years ago I stayed in a cabin and just had a lovely, lovely time meeting all of the wonderful rescued chickens and cows and pigs and other fortunate animals at Animal Place. And so I also had the great fortune, as many of us find it to be the case, when we meet somebody we know from online, on the internet, in person. It's always a thrill. It's always exciting. And it's always just so gratifying. It's nothing like in the flesh. So, in the sense of meeting other people. And meeting and getting to know the members of other species alive in the flesh is what I mean. Okay. I don't want to be misunderstood here. Anyway, Marji Beach earned her animal science degree from University of California, Davis. And she is using that knowledge that she earned to advocate on behalf of farmed animals. As education director of Animal Place, Marji has a decade of experience working with farmed animals. She developed Animal Place's flagship rescue and adoption program called Rescue Ranch, which saves animals from slaughter. Marji oversees the sanctuary's advocacy, volunteer, social media, and internship efforts. Marji's photography has been featured in several books, and I don't know where Marji is, but I'm certainly delighted to introduce her. There she is. Thank you.
I'm actually, hopefully, can you hear me? I don't like to stand behind a podium. I like to be moving because I got all this nervous energy to get out. So I am so honored and privileged to be here today, and thank you so much to Karen and Hope for putting on this conference. It's so vital to the discussion about farmed animals. So I work for Animal Place, and Animal Place is a 600-acre sanctuary up in Grass Valley, and we also operate a 60-acre adoption and rescue center in Vacaville called Rescue Ranch. Not only do we provide safe haven to hundreds of needy farmed animals, but we're also an advocacy, outreach, and education organization. We want to shift the way people think and perceive of farmed animals, which are the most exploited and abused group of animals on this planet. You already got my introduction. I studied animal science at UC Davis and hated it. And so I was inspired, I wanted to be a vet, and that was the career path I was taking. And after my experience at UC Davis and really seeing firsthand what happens to farmed animals, UC Davis has a dairy farm, they have an operating slaughterhouse, they have a beef ranch raising cattle for slaughter, they have a battery cage operation, and they have a pig farm there as well. And so you have to intern at one of those facilities as an animal science major, and I interned at the dairy farm. And seeing firsthand what happens when a calf is stolen from his mother and the sorrow and bellow she makes when her baby is taken away, I mean, to me, that was just that iconic aha moment where that's what I contribute to. Every time I drink a glass of milk, eat ice cream, cheese, that was the suffering I was complicit in. And so I wanted to change my path. And it's kind of hard to find an animal rights path, but I was lucky enough to find Animal Place, and I've been with them for a decade, and I love the work I do. So I'm going to be talking today about the myth of humane animal farming, or the humane hoax, as seen through the lens of a sanctuary. And I think sanctuary workers, interns, and volunteers are uniquely positioned to offer insight on the issue of, can you justly, compassionately, humanely raise an animal and kill them for their flesh, or consume their breast milk, or steal their eggs? I have my very strong opinions, and I'm sure most of you do too. But the reason is, all of us who have worked at a sanctuary or volunteered or interned have been in those farms. I have literally scooped up hens from some of the most beautiful farms you could imagine. I think the kind of farms that people think of when they think of a farm: pasture-based, animals exhibiting their natural behaviors, that freedom to roam. I have taken those hens from those farms, and I have been inside battery cage industrial farms where hens can't even spread their wings. And what has struck me the most has been, it's not so much the differences in how they're housed, but it's all the similarities that tie them all together that, to me, draws the conclusion that you can't justify any way of oppressing or abusing or exploiting farmed animals. But I think that's one reason that farmed animal advocates who work at sanctuaries and who do this kind of work really are uniquely positioned to talk about this issue, because we've seen it firsthand and we can share those experiences with you. The way this presentation is structured is in 3 parts. I'm going to be talking about the egg, dairy, and the animal flesh or meat industries. I'm going to focus a lot on the egg and dairy industries, and mostly on the egg industry, and that's because of our Rescue Ranch program. We started Rescue Ranch at the end of 2010 in August with the idea that we would save the lives of as many animals as we could, save them from slaughter, and rehabilitate them, get them as healthy as possible, and then find them permanent, pre-approved, pre-screened adoptive homes. Since we started this program, we've saved over 13,000 lives, which is not something our sanctuary could do. We can't take in that many animals and keep them safe for the rest of their lives. So Rescue Ranch serves as a way for us to save a lot of lives, and our sanctuary offers people like you the chance to meet those individuals, but who also just represent a small number of the total number of animals raised and exploited. Now, the way I'm going to do this presentation is through storytelling. Humans love stories. We're not real rational beings, so we like emotional stories. And that's often how we make our decisions, is based on this emotional reaction. And so I am going to throw, factoids and statistics at you, but I really want it to be through the narrative of these animals who we've rescued and who have stories to share. And I'm just going to be a little speaker for them. And I'm going to start with the egg industry. Look at these girls. So we have Frida, Peanut, Tiny Comb, and Poppy. And so these 4 hens come from 4 different farms. Frida and Peanut both come from pasture-based farms. These are farms where the hens have access to the outdoors. They have grass to chew on. They have room to roam. They can engage in all of their natural behaviors like perching, dust bathing, nesting, things like that. Tiny Comb and Poppy are from 2 battery cage farms. Tiny Comb is from our largest rescue, which we did in 2012, Turlock, where we saved over 4,400 hens from a farm that had stopped feeding the birds for over 2 weeks. Poppy is from our latest battery cage rescue, which was last year. And we saved 3,000 chickens from a farm that's unfortunately still in business, but at least we were able to save their lives. We did fly 1,100 of them across the country to sanctuaries like Karen's and several others who were able to take those girls in. We actually still have 50 of them left who would love a good home. So I want to talk a little bit about where these girls come from. So unlike wild chickens, chickens who are used for egg production are not born in a nest. They do not hear their mother talking to them through the egg, as would happen naturally. That's that important social bond that develops before these birds even hatch. They are born in what are called hatcheries. The unique thing about our Rescue Ranch program is that we often know the entire history of the animals who come into our care. We know where they're born, we know what vaccines they've given, we know all their health background. And so it's been very fascinating since this program has started to kind of see the history of these birds and see how similar they actually are. So these girls all came from the same hatchery. Highline, 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 Highline. Highline is one of the world's largest hatcheries. 45% of global egg production comes from hens who have been born in Highline hatcheries. If any of you buy commercial eggs in the United States, nearly 80% of all white eggs come from hens who were born on Highline hatcheries. It's a huge, huge, huge industry for hatchery production. And all 4 of these hens, despite the fact that they end up at very different farms, all were born in the exact same hatchery. Not exactly the same facility. They have several different facilities. So what is a hatchery? A hatchery is basically a large warehouse with rows and rows and rows of incubators where eggs are in these trays. This is a Highline incubator. And the eggs are turned and kept at the right temperature. And that's where all the chicks hatch. So when the chicks are born, half of all chicks are going to be male and half are going to be female. And so they have to find a way to identify the birds. Brown birds are sex-linked, and so the birds on the bottom in that top photos are male, and the ones on the top are female, and that's how they're separated by sex. For white chickens, they often use feather length. The longer feathers are girls, and the shorter ones are boys. It's important to realize that males of these breeds grow slowly. They don't grow as fast as chickens raised for meat consumption, who are babies when they're killed. It is not economically viable to raise all of these little baby chicks into, a commercial product. It's not, you can't raise them to slaughter them. And so they are all killed the day they are hatched. These are 2 common methods. The most common method of killing male chicks, and the method that the Highline hatcheries use, is called maceration, which is a large industrial grinder that these day-old, fully conscious chicks are thrown into. And it's more than 150 million male chicks who are killed every year in hatcheries like this. Some are gassed, some are suffocated, but it doesn't matter if you buy eggs from organic, free-range, pasture-based farms, or big farms or cage-free farms. Behind every single egg you buy, a male chick has been killed, and you cannot get away from that. And that's one of the reasons why it's just virtually impossible to have quote-unquote humane egg production, because it starts out with suffering. It starts out with mass murder. The girls are separated and they're debeaked. This is a Highline debeaking machine, which uses infrared lasers to sear off a portion of these girls' beaks. Now, despite the fact that Frida and Peanut ended up at 2 different pasture-based farms, you may not have noticed it, but Peanut has been debeaked. And that's because at this farm, which is up north in California, they have very harsh winters, and they keep the birds locked up 5 months out of the year inside their barns. And when you have 500 birds inside of a barn, it's no different than cramming 10 birds inside of a cage. They're going to fight. They're not going to be able to escape each other. And so instead of not raising chickens for egg production, they simply cut off portions of their bodies so that they can confine them. Birds have very nerve-rich and blood-rich beaks. Beaks are like their thumbs, they're like their mouths. I mean, they use their beaks for everything. And these girls are left mutilated and deformed for the remainder of their lives. They have difficulty preening, cleaning themselves. They're usually lower ranking, not all of them, but most of them are because they can't defend themselves from fully beaked birds. So it leaves them mutilated for their entire lives. And this, of course, happens on all caged operations, all cage-free operations, and any free-range operation that's very large. And it happens on small farms, too. So I'm just going to show you the two extremes of housing and labels, and then I'll show you two examples of confusing labels. So on the right is a standard battery cage operation. This is an operation in Michigan. They have 3 million birds, so it's a very large facility. And this is how the vast majority of hens in the United States are housed. It's 95, 96%, of the millions and millions of hens in this country. So that's kind of the normal. That's normal for egg farming these days. And at the other extreme are your kind of pasture-based, real small farms. This is from Polyface Farm, where these birds are kept 6 months out of the year inside this hoop barn. And then this is from another farm, very similar to one we've rescued from. So the problem with these farms in terms of housing is not so much the housing provided, but the lack of medical care provided. They're still treated as a flock, and as such, they're not provided the individual care that they need. Our very first rescue was from a farm where we took in 250 hens, which is a small number of hens. And all of them had been banded with leg bands as babies, these plastic leg bands, and they never took them off. And so they became embedded in their legs, and we had several who didn't have feet, and all of them had severely embedded leg bands. And that's because this person just didn't take the time to remove those leg bands as the bird aged. So the lack of individual care is common on any farm, whether it's this nice pastoral farm or a big industrial farm. So Gulam Egg Ranch is an egg farm in Santa Cruz County. They market themselves as cage-free and super awesome. In fact, I have this, it's not my egg carton. I had a volunteer who donated it to me. I usually bring it to show to people because it's nice to have hands-on stuff, but instead I took a picture. And so they call themselves organic free range, and it's really nice. They're certified humane, super awesome. It says in here that, although it's kind of blurry there, that they have the freedom to roam, like they can roam free. And so if you're a consumer, you look at that and think they have a great life. And this is their life. They live in barns. These are cage-free barns. They're not free-range barns at all. They don't have access to outdoors. And if you remember that photo of the hens from Michigan with that aerial view, it doesn't look that much different. They have about 10 to 20,000 chickens on their farm. It's a little deceptive. But my favorite is Judy's family farm. Animal Legal Defense Fund sued them several years ago for false advertising and recently won their lawsuit, which is fabulous. So they'll have to take down their false advertising claims here. This is the picture up above is what you'll find on their website. It's a really beautiful looking place. It's got green grass, it's nice, pastoral. They market themselves as certified humane, family farm. They are the largest producer for Organic Valley Co-op, which is the country's largest producer of organic eggs and other animal products. They made a special exemption for Judy's family farm because they were the only farm they could find that could supply California with the number of eggs, organic eggs, that California consumers wanted. Oh, and this, they're raised in wide open spaces, which from their website, you'd think they'd be running loose all out there in that pasture. But they're not. This is what their farm looks like from an aerial view. They raise about 40,000 chickens. They also have a dairy facility as well, so some of those sheds are for the cows. So that's what their barn looks like. They're confined indoors. They don't have outdoor access, despite the claims that were made by the farm, and that's their lives. Look at all these chickens. So I want to talk a little bit about production levels, because this is really important, too, to the discussion. Dorothy is one of our little feral hens. She is the only hen to date who has successfully escaped off into the wilderness to lay a clutch of eggs and come back proudly with her little brood. She's a sassy mom, very protective. We could not get near her. That is her very, I'm angry, don't come any closer to me or I will peck you in the face look. And she would. Chickens lay eggs. They don't lay eggs for people. They lay eggs to produce a clutch of babies for the next generation. So when a chicken lays a clutch, maybe she'll do it twice a year, but it's often just once. She's just going to lay a little nest. She's going to maybe have a dozen eggs. The amount of eggs that Dorothy produces in a year is maybe 30 or 40. And that's because she's what the wild jungle fowl kind of looks like. She's got her ancestors' wildness in her. And so she doesn't have the same kind of problems that other chickens from high-producing breeds do because she is laying the number of eggs that nature intended to produce the next generation of chickens. We have Lavender down here. Lavender is this little black hen. She's an Australorp. An Australorp is a crossbreed used for, they call them dual purpose, so they're used both for slaughter, for consuming animal flesh, as well as for egg production. And they produce about 140 eggs a year. They still have health problems because of that, because that's a lot more eggs than 30 or 40 a year. But they have fewer health problems than these hens here. All groups here of these hens are the most commonly used breeds or types of chickens in the egg industry. The white Leghorn is, of course, the most common. It's where all the white eggs come from. And then you have these red girls who are usually crossbreeds or hybrids who also produce a high number of eggs. Dorothy, 30 to 40 eggs. These girls, Poppy and Frida, they're producing around 280 to 320 eggs a year. That is an enormous number of eggs. That's up to 5 times more eggs than they should be producing. So even if these birds are being raised on these really small, nice farms, for the most part, they're using breeds or types of chickens who produce a lot of eggs, because it is not economically viable to raise a bunch of Dorothys and try to produce 70 billion table eggs a year, because that's what people consume. Those white Leghorns and those red hens, they produce about the number of eggs that one United States citizen consumes every year. That's how many eggs people eat in a year, one person, around 260 to 280. It's a lot of eggs. So what happens to these girls' bodies because of this egg production? They have a lot of health problems. And even though we save them from these horrific conditions or these nice farms, it's really hard for us to fix the problems that have been forced upon them by humans through selective breeding. So the health problems that the ones we can sort of fix are the nutritional deficiencies. We rescue a lot of the hens from the battery cage operations, and they have osteoporosis. Their bones break very easily. So with some exercise and extra calcium, we do feed all the eggs back to the chickens so that they get the calcium they lose and protein back. It may seem creepy, but they really love it, so why deny them that? They're their eggs. So we can fix some of that, the nutritional deficiencies. On a larger scale, though, fixing the reproductive problems is incredibly difficult. Yes, there are implants, and yes, there's an extraordinarily expensive surgery you can do to remove the oviduct of these hens. It costs over $1,500, and so it's very cost prohibitive for most people to do. But the common problems that these girls have: ovarian cancer, bacterial infections, because an egg yolk might leak out inside of their body, eggs get stuck inside of them, their entire reproductive system tries to push itself out. Those are called prolapses. They have a lot of health problems. And so whether you want to buy eggs from a nice farm or a standard caged farm, you're still subjecting these animals to intentional cruelty by creating animals who have, by their very nature, significant health problems. So the reality is there are, a lot of chickens who are raised for egg production. There's nearly 400 million of them. There are no happy little places where 400 million hens are going to be living out in the plains or out in some great sanctuary somewhere. At a year of age, they reach peak production. And this is when they're going to produce that 300 eggs a year. After that, their bodies are just called spent, and literally they're spent. They are just sucked dry from all this egg production. And so unless they're forced to molt, to shed all their feathers and kind of renew their reproductive lining through restricted feed, they are killed because it's not profitable to keep these hens past 1 or 2 years of age, because you have to spend more money to feed them than you're getting back from the eggs. So on smaller farms, these are actually roosters being killed, but just as an example, they have these killing cones they use where the bird is inserted into the cone and their throats are slashed while they're fully conscious. There's the kind of more traditional standard methods of slaughter, which is common for certainly meat chickens raised for their flesh, and that's a large slaughter line and a smaller one, where they're put in the leg restraints, hung upside down, run through an electrified water bath, which doesn't kill them, renders them, it paralyzes their muscles. They're still fully conscious in most cases, and then their throats are slashed. What is really common in California, and probably in a lot of the large egg states, we are the 5th largest egg state. We have about 20 million hens on egg farms in our state. We're the 5th largest. The most common method in California is gassing. And I've seen this done because we were forced to see it at Turlock, and then last year we saw it being done as we were pulling hens from cages. Workers were at other sheds gassing the birds. And there are large gassing chambers, like the picture on the bottom, that are supposed to be less stressful for the birds. There are also gassing canisters, which are like yay big. They fit about 150 hens. The hens are thrown in there fully conscious, and so the birds on the bottom are being smothered to death before they're being gassed. At Turlock and at this other farm that we were at last year, they're literally put in trash bins, plastic trash bins. I mean, if that doesn't tell you what the chicken industry thinks of chickens, I don't know what does. They're trash. So they stick them in there, they'll funnel often carbon dioxide in there, and then they'll gas them. Chickens have incredibly sensitive respiratory systems. Gassing is incredibly stressful for them. It's painful. It's a miserable way for them to die. And again, most of them are suffocating on the bottom. The ones who don't suffocate, and I saw it happen, they would pop up out of the dead pile, and then their necks would be broken by the workers there. And what happens to their bodies? These birds are so tiny. They weigh like 3 pounds, so they aren't really profitable to eat. So they're literally, all their feces is shoved out of the cages, all the facilities. They're all raked up. Their birds are dumped in that shit pile, and then they're all shipped to the landfill because that's what happens to them. Sorry. So these are the kind of key takeaways that apply for both small farms, large farms, nice farms, not so nice farms. Rooster chicks are always killed. I didn't talk about parent birds, but they suffer the same fate and they live in the same kind of housing conditions as caged birds. They're also all killed. Hens can't escape, what we have done to their bodies. And so they suffer from all those health effects. And they're all killed at the end of the day, all of them. Ooh, look at these guys. So that's Nicholas. He's the best cow right now. And that's Linus. They're both from the dairy industry. So with the dairy industry, I'm going to kind of talk about 2 extremes. Sadie, the black and white cow, hands down the best cow I have ever known. I have never loved, beside my dog, an animal as much as I love Sadie. And Sadie, unfortunately, had to be euthanized, but for 9 years, she was just a wonderful, wonderful friend. And she came from a conventional dairy farm with about 3,500 cows. We unfortunately don't have this cow, but we don't get the chance to rescue female cows very often from the dairy industry, so I'm just using an example of a cow from an actual farm, a raw milk farm, so kind of the extreme end of dairy production, small farm. They have 350 cows. And then Sadie, the more, what has become more traditional are those large industrial farms. When Sadie was born, she never nursed from her own mother. So she was removed right after birth. Approximately 75% of all calves in the dairy industry are taken from their moms within the first hour. 92% are taken from their moms within the first 24 hours. A calf will nurse off of his or her mother for as long as he can until she kicks him away. And I have seen 2-year-old cows try to nurse from their moms, as she's like, really, guys? But the normal weaning process is 8 to 12 months. That's how long it usually takes. On this smaller farm, she would have spent 48 hours with her mom, and then she would have been taken away. This is how most female calves are housed on both small and large farms. They consider it a biosecurity and health safety issue. These are calf hutches. Sometimes people confuse them for veal farms. They're not. These are where female calves are. So they're hutches where they're often chained or tethered, or they have a small little outdoor area where they can barely turn around. The idea is they cannot touch the other calves near them, so they don't spread disease. They wouldn't have this problem if they were with their mother, because that is what's normal and natural. Some facilities use what are called group housing, so they'll put 8 to 10 calves in one small area. The calves in the calf hutches will spend 3 to 6 months in those calf hutches before they go onto group housing, and that'll be their core herd for the rest of their quote-unquote productive life. So Sadie was artificially inseminated. Most dairy cows are. They're forcibly impregnated against their will by humans. So that the whole artificial insemination is dairy facilities. It's really creepy because they just have it. They're obsessed with it, with bloodlines and getting that mammary udder the right size and milk production, and it's just super creepy. On the small farm with the 350 cows, they still use a bull. That's not normal. They consider these bulls too aggressive to be around people, so that's why they use artificial insemination, they claim. They often use nose rings, septum rings on bulls, so that, which is very painful, so that they can grab them and control them better. Sadie was only 12 months old when she was impregnated. It takes 3 to 5 years for a cow to reach full maturity and full size. She is essentially a teenager, comparable to a 12 or 13-year-old human being impregnated. It takes an enormous strain on their body. They're not physically ready to handle pregnancy. The other girl, they breed their cows a little older at 14 months, but they're still virtual babies. These are just an example of a couple of milking parlors. So cows aren't milked by hand, they're milked by machines. And so they're all put into these milking parlors. I don't have a photo of it, but Sadie was tail docked, which has been banned in California but is growing in popularity. Tail docking serves the purpose of when you're milking from behind, you don't get hit in the face by the tail. So instead of, 1, not raising cows for milk production, but 2, using a different milking parlor design, they cut off their tails. And with cows on dairy farms, both small and large, they do it when they're 9 to 10 months old. So their vertebrae are fully fused, and it's incredible. They have to physically break the tail before they can remove it. It's incredibly painful. Now, at the raw milk farm, they have one of these mobile milking parlors. So those cows do have access to graze. They do have that outdoor experience, and they are not forced to come into a milking parlor. The parlor is brought to them. And the reason that cows go into these milking parlors so willingly, and I saw it at UC Davis because I interned at their dairy farm, is because they got a lot of milk in there. And anybody who has had a child and has nursed wants that milk out. It's very uncomfortable. So these are just examples of milk production. Frances is a cow who was rescued from the beef industry, and she lived with us for several years. Unfortunately, she passed away from cancer. But she produced 1 or 2 gallons of milk a day. That's normal. That's what a calf will consume daily so that he can grow up to be, an 800-pound teenager. Elsa is a cow we rescued from a very small dairy farm. It was actually a Waldorf school. They only had 2 cows. When she reached the age of 15, they bought 4 draft horses and decided this tiny little cow ate too much and was going to send her to slaughter after 15 years. We were able to rescue her. She died when she was 18, so cows can live pretty good long lives. She's a Jersey, which is a breed commonly used in the dairy industry, thank you, for buttermilk and cheese and that kind of milk production. She produces about 5 gallons of milk. And then Sadie, the Holstein, they're epic producers of milk because they've been bred that way. They produce 8 to 10 gallons of milk. Their udders weigh like 50 pounds. And if you can imagine an udder swaying off of your body weighing that much, you're going to walk into that milk parlor and you're going to alleviate some of that discomfort because it's painful. They have a lot of health problems because of overmilking and overmilk production. Mastitis, leg problems, reproductive disorders. And no matter what kind of farm they come from, so that smaller farm slaughters the cows at 8 years of age, and they consider that good. And then at Sadie's facility, she was going to be slaughtered at 4 years of age. And that's the average productive lifespan of a cow on a dairy farm, 4 to 6 years. You saw, Elsa lived to be 18. Sadie had other health impediments, but she was euthanized when she was 14. And she could have lived longer without those other health issues. But at the end of the day, all these girls are slaughtered. Cute pictures. They all live at Animal Place. You can visit them. So males, just the same problem as the egg industry. Males don't produce milk, and so they are not of much value. And so what happens to them kind of depends on where they are. In New York, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, the veal industry is popular there, and that is where most calves raised for veal production are confined, and their crates so small they can't turn around or they're chained, and they're raised until they're 18 to 24 weeks old, and then they're slaughtered. In California, we are the #1 dairy state. We have a lot of cows here. We take advantage of the fact that Holsteins grow pretty quickly and that they can be raised for food production. And so they are slaughtered at about 2 years of age, so they're still very young. We actually export a lot of our Holstein male calves to the Midwest to be fattened on feedlots. And that's an example of a feedlot. If you ever go down to Southern California, you'll smell it before you see it. Harris Ranch is a huge 100,000 cow capacity feedlot. And sometimes during certain parts of the year, you'll see a lot of black and white cows there. And those are the males from the dairy industry. So key takeaways. The dairy industry relies on one of the most brutal, cruel acts you can inflict on another being. And that is the stealing of their babies. If you have never witnessed it, I hope you never do. It is one of the most heartbreaking things you will ever see. Sadie, when we rescued her, was pregnant, and we didn't know it. And so, unfortunately, her calf died inside of her. And he was pulled out, and we let her be with him. And this is the first time she had ever been with her calf. And she groomed him for 3 hours before we had to finally take him away. I'm sorry. Sadie was just really special. They want that bond, and we deny that to millions of mothers and children in this country. And it doesn't matter if that farm is an organic, free-range, pasture-based farm. That still happens. We still steal babies from their mothers so we can drink the breast milk of another species. And there's just no reason to. I'm going to talk just super briefly with a few stories. I know I'm short on time, so I'll just share a few stories and try and get through them. Ruby is a top piglet there. She's sassy. She's tiny. She's only like this tall, but tons of personality. She got these big floppy ears that she will flip up when she's really mad, and so to kind of get away from her at that point. I cannot make Ruby's story up. It is a bizarre story, but it is the true story. Ruby was rescued from a Sonoma-based, pasture-based pig farm, where pigs are free to roam. They're free to build nests to have their babies in. They're not confined in gestation or farrowing crates. And they give tours. So you can come to this farm and go on a tour. And so this woman was on this tour, and the farmer had Ruby in her arms. And she was talking about the pigs and the farm, and this visitor asked, well, what's the story with this little piglet? And the farmer said, you want the honest truth? And the woman said, sure, yeah. And she said, well, Ruby's a runt. I don't have the time to raise Ruby to slaughter age or weight, which on this farm is 8 months old. They're babies. So I'm going to have to euthanize her. That's the word she used. And the woman asked, well, what do you mean, euthanize? And she said it's the standard practice on pig farms, and it's called thumping. And you take the piglet by their rear legs, and you slam them in the concrete until they die. And that's what she was going to do to this little 2-day-old piglet. Oh, God, I'm just so emotional. So the woman asked, well, can I have her? And the farmer really didn't think Ruby was going to live and gave the piglet to this woman, and she called us up. And, we said we couldn't take a 2-day-old piglet because we had other animals we had just rescued and just couldn't happen, but could you hold on to her for a couple months and then we could take her then? And she said, sure. And so we rescued, when she came to us, the most well-trained piglet ever. She walked on a harness. She would sit for grapes. Oh, she was so cute. And then, of course, we don't reinforce any of that. And so now she just bites you and gets mad. So she's very sassy. We still love her. Some of you may recognize Panda Bob from our Facebook page. He has a weekly address to the world about all the tragedies that befall him at Animal Place, like not getting enough bottles, things like that. So he comes from a very small farm raising cattle for slaughter. And his mother was so sick, because they don't receive individual veterinary care, thank you, that she couldn't even stand up to give birth to him. That's how sick she was. Animal control, in one of those rare circumstances, confiscated the mother, and Bob was still inside of her, and rescued her. And we said we would take her and the baby when he was born, because we never get a chance to, we rarely get a chance to rescue mamas and their babies. So of course we leapt at that opportunity. Unfortunately, she was so sick that she died. And there was just this moment when she was down and she had given birth, and she was really stressful because she really wanted to nurse her baby. And she was crying and he was crying. And then the second that the veterinarian came in and gave him a bottle and she saw him being fed, she just took a deep breath, and that was it. Someone was taking care of her baby. I really wish we could have saved her, really do. So he would have been castrated at about 4 to 6 months of age with a rubber band. And that's standard practice on small and large farms. And even though he would have been on a small farm with grass, he would have been killed when he was only 2 years old. They're still teenagers. If you ever come to Animal Place, you can meet some of them. You can't, because they're teenagers, and they just play, and they weigh 1,200 pounds, and it's not fun for you. But you could see that they're still essentially, babies when they're killed. And then Lucy was running loose in Southern California, and she probably escaped from a backyard where they were going to raise her for backyard slaughter. And she came to us. Sorry, I only have a little bit of time. So this is Errol. Errol is the friendliest rooster ever. He's a lap rooster, and he likes to sit on your lap, as you can see. Errol, if you come to Animal Place, he will be your favorite chicken. I can guarantee it. We let him out just to walk around when we have the tour, and he just struts up to everybody and talks to them and lets them know about his day and all of that. But that's where he came from. So in the cage above, he was being sold out at an auction. It was pouring rain. These birds had been left out in the pouring rain for 6 hours. They were incredibly ill. You can see on the right side, most of them can't stand. Because they were so sick. And so nobody wanted to buy them. Nobody wanted these birds because they were so ill that they didn't even want to eat them. And so I ended up taking them back. I said, hey, Kim, I got some chickens. We call them peepers because when you rescue them, they're 6 weeks old. These are chickens raised for their flesh. They peep like babies. They act like babies. I mean, it's just heartbreaking. And it just aches to think that 9 billion Errols their lives just snuffed out. Little babies. For what? And this is him today, all sassy, gorgeous. And then these three turkeys, Dakota and Jude, they both came from really well-known pasture-based free-range turkey farms. These two guys came from Diestel Ranch. This is what the owner of Diestel Ranch says about debeaking, that they grow back, but just without a lethal hook, and that it doesn't hurt. Now, this is Dakota, and he's already 2 years old in this photo, and it has not grown back, because that is not how it works. Beaks don't just magically grow back after you've cut, more than half of it off. So even though he's from Diestel Ranch, we didn't rescue him. Somebody magical liberated them and brought them. It was our Thanksgiving gift. They left him on our doorstep. And they have been debeaked, and the first digits of their toes have been cut off. And this is a turkey farm that has won awards for being nice to animals. Jude is from a pasture-based farm. If you ever go on our YouTube page, we have a video called Something to Be Thankful For, and it features Jude's story. He comes from another award-winning pasture-based farm that Whole Foods uses. They have 40,000 turkeys, so really nice there. He has been debeaked. His snood, which is the fleshy bit you can see hanging off the top of Dakota's head, has been snipped off, and the first digits of his toes have been cut off. So despite winning awards for being super humane, they still severely mutilate these birds, who are all killed when they're 5 to 6 months old. They're little babies. So I hope through the stories that I've shared today that you recognize why there just is no such thing as compassionately or humanely raising an animal, either for their flesh, for their eggs, or for their breast milk. It's simply not possible, because it's not those differences that matter. It doesn't matter how they're housed. It's all those similarities that make both types of farming equally cruel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marji. That's awesome. We'll get it back to you in a sec.